Hi, I'm Alan with the Review Board, and this is a short introduction to the part of the environmental assessment called the Developer's Assessment Report. This is an introduction for Indigenous governments, community governments, and community organizations. When we talk about the developer in an environmental assessment, we mean the organization that wants to build a project. This could be a private company, for example, for a mine, or it could even be government sometimes when the development is infrastructure, like a road or a dam. The developer will make a report called a Developer's Assessment Report for the Review Board. And that report describes what the proposed project is in detail and describes the developer's impact predictions that they expect will happen when they develop and run the project. They also talk about, the developer's assessment report also talks about how the developer wants to reduce or avoid those impacts, what kind of mitigations it will use to do that. The developer's assessment report includes all of the information that the review board required from the questions in its terms of reference. The terms of reference that the board issued will include questions from communities and Indigenous governments that came up in the scoping sessions that the board held in communities and elsewhere. When the review board gets a developer's assessment report, it will check to see whether or not each question in that terms of reference has been answered. And if not, it issues something called an adequacy statement that tells the developer what other information is needed to move on with the environmental assessment. When the board is deciding whether or not to issue the adequacy statement, it will take comments from parties, including Indigenous governments and others, to hear their views on whether or not each question has been answered. When Indigenous governments get the developer's assessment report, they need to review it. They need to think about whether or not the developer addressed the issues that they raised during scoping and how well those issues have been addressed. Indigenous governments should think about whether or not they agree with the developer's predictions. And most importantly, at this stage, are the developer's answers good enough to move on with the assessment? Are the answers clear enough and complete enough? If not, please tell the review board. At the same time, Indigenous governments should flag any other questions and concerns during their review of the developer's assessment report for the next stage, where they'll have a chance to ask written information requests directly to the developer. When the developer's assessment report is received, the question on Indigenous governments' minds should be, did the developer provide the information that you need to predict the impacts? Thank you.